Thank you, and welcome to Gadgets for Families, the tech podcast for the family IT person and the mom in charge of home networking and the son that handle all the account setups and the neighbor that needs help installing the security cameras and the student looking to get better tech, upgrade their tech, the grandpa with his new phone, the butcher, the baker, and yes, the popcorn maker, and anyone else trying to get more out of their lives through tech. I'm your host, Jay Benjamin.
And I'm your host, Greg Cunningham. Thank you for joining us for episode 20. And I got to tell you, Jason, when I read this in the show notes yesterday when I was trying to fill in some stuff, I was like, I
Mhm.
had the rhyme going. I had the rhythm.
Yeah.
I was bobbing my head to it.
Yeah. I thought that was a good throwback because we wanted to make the show about anyone, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that here in a moment. But so Greg and I have said from the very beginning that this wasn't going to be a set structure, set in stone kind of podcast, right? We were always going to be forever improving things and tweaking things and streamlining lining things to make a better show. So, like we said from the beginning, this was going to be a journey more than it was a set podcast, right? So, I thought today we would talk about this journey that we've had so far, right? So, we've made a lot of changes. We made some improvements, some things we tried that we just didn't like that it just didn't feel like it was going to work out. We made some changes here and there, but Greg, off of the top of your head, can you think of any changes that we made that just felt right?
Just doing the show, right?
Right?
So that was when I was reading through your questions and prepping for the show. And yes, we do a little bit of prep for the show. Um, just doing the show felt right. We decided when we would launch it and then
Yeah.
making it casual. I think at the beginning, and I think you've got this a little bit later in the feedback, maybe we did try and make things a little too structured and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But do the show, have fun doing it, and what happens, happens. So that's what I
Right.
think feels
Right.
the best.
Okay. All right. So what I was thinking that we would do today, uh, you know, just to change from our regular show, is just take a look back at the first 19 episodes. Right. We'll talk about some of the things we learned, some of the mistakes that we've made, some of and cover some of the changes that we made to our setup, software, hardware, things like that, and just talk about them today here on this episode 20. So um, after that, we'll talk about a little tech, right? Because what is a tech show if we don't talk about tech, right? We can't just talk about ourselves for the whole episode. And we'll find out what you did to your home screen and changes you made to focus mode and things like that. And yeah, we'll get into it here shortly. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it sounds great. Do a little bit of that in the post show. We've got some good current stuff and some tips too, I think,
Yeah.
that will be useful. So we'll do that early and then chat about the show, which has been a lot of fun. And then we'll get geeky. There's one really geeky topic for the
Yeah,
post show.
yeah. I,
So
I think so. I forgot to add it to the notes, but ever since you sent it, I wanted to talk to you about it. So we'll get into that here. So, but before we do, share the show with anyone that we described in the intro, right? Friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, anyone you feel that can benefit from the show. Also, take a look at the YouTube channel, right? Things are really starting to pick up over there. We some of the changes that we're going to talk about, segmenting out the show and giving us more video content um, it's really starting to show some improvement, getting some traction over there on YouTube. So it's youtube.com/GDTS for FMLS, and that's Gadgets for Families abbreviated. And things are, like I said, starting to pick up over there. So check that out. Also, check out our blog. Greg wrote some really good blogs last week and the week before, and posted them. Really good reads. Check those out too. And as usual, all of the socials, Instagram, things like that. And give us your feedback. Let us know what you would like to hear, any topics you want us to cover, any critiques, any complaints, anything. Just share it with us, and we'll address those pretty quickly.
yeah, I dropped a new blog post. I think I published it last night was when it went
Okay.
live, and it's on watchOS 10 this time. So there's a blog post out there on all those upgrades I did. One on
Mhm.
the iPhone 15 Pro Max setting it up, AirPods Pro 2, iOS 17, some thoughts a few weeks in, and now
Right.
watchOS 10. And then dropping later this week will be some shorts and a little bit longer, like 2 to 3 minute longer videos on YouTube, kind of summarizing all of those blog posts. So
Yeah.
I know some folks just don't have time to go in and take a few minutes to read a blog post. So put together a couple of videos that talk through it, and boy, did I talk fast on a
Yeah.
couple of those videos to try and get it in. So,
Right.
but yeah,
Right.
check all that stuff out. All that stuff helps, and the more you promote the show, the more you let folks know the different resources. We're just trying to give you the content in whatever format makes it easiest for you. So,
Right. Right. Um, yeah, one of the things I was going to talk about later is how I consume the show even after we record it. And I found it hard to get in some of the longer episodes and stuff like that. But since we've been on YouTube, I found it a lot easier to keep up with things. So, listen however whatever is best for you, whether it's on Spotify, the podcast app, or you're viewing on YouTube, checking out the shorts. We'll try to make it all to get you the information that in the best way possible, the best consumable way possible for you guys. So, Greg, let's talk about some current stuff. Um, when I heard this, when you sent the article to me, I'm like, oh, I thought I was the only one because I realized it, and I thought it was just, you wake up in the morning and your phone it's off, right? Because we have those always on screens, and you're like, okay, well, what's going on with this? Maybe it did an update and it's waiting for me to enter my passcode or something like that. Well, then it happened again, maybe the next week or a few days later, and I'm like, okay, there was no updates going on or something like that. And then by the third time that it happened, you send the article, and I'm like, okay, well, it's happening to everyone. So, what have you been seeing?
yeah, so I mean, you can see this all over the place, and it's various Apple devices, and it's not just
Hmm.
iOS 17. Apparently, this has been around since iOS 16, but we're seeing a flood of either people have noticed it or
Hmm.
whatever, that something's going on overnight. I don't know that we know exactly what it is because I've had two different behaviors. So something's
Hmm.
happening overnight where one of two scenarios: either it's respringing, and for those of you that don't know, that's it's kind of like half a reboot, right?
Yes.
Something crashes, the Apple logo pops up, and then your device is right back where it was. You don't even necessarily have to sign back in or any of those
Right.
kinds of things because it's just something happened and it sort of reboots, but not a full reboot. So that's
Right.
one thing that's happening. And I've had that happen a couple of times with my phone. Um, One time I happened to be rolling over, the grandson was in the middle kicking me, and I happened to roll over, and all of a sudden the Apple logo is showing up on my
Yep.
Pro Max that's sitting on my stand. So that's one of the things that's happening. And then the other thing that's happening is, and this happened on my iPad mini first, people are waking up and it's saying you have to enter a passcode after a restart.
Hmm.
And you're going, I've been asleep for however many hours, right? I
Yeah.
didn't do a restart. And if you go in and look at the battery history, because that'll tell you when it's charging, when it's not, all those kinds of things. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but my iPad mini will charge to 100% and then actually stop charging. And then
Yes.
at some point, it'll start charging again when it started to dip below that. And for a while, it freaked me out that all of a sudden I would hear the ding that it was starting to charge
Yeah.
again. And I wondered,
Started charging.
do I have a problem with my plugs? Do I have a problem, do I have a short in the cable or something like that?
Yeah.
But anyway, so if you go in and look, then there's this gap in your battery history where it kind of looks like it's grayed out, right? And so there will be several hours where all of the columns, they kind of look like they're there, but they look like they're grayed out. And so what that means
Right.
is that the device didn't know what was going on during that time from a battery charge standpoint. So
Yes. It was either the first or the second time. It was similar to you. I looked at the phone just to kind of see the time. Nothing on the screen. It was black. So I grabbed the phone and I'm greeted with the Apple logo. So that's when I was like, okay, well, maybe weird time to finish an update when it usually finishes as an update over in the middle of the night. So I'm like, okay, weird time for it to update, and didn't think anything of it. And then yeah, after it happened again, I'm greeted with the enter your passcode for to access the phone. I'm like, okay, I'm not restarting the phone. What's going on? And yeah, so it seems like something that more people are experiencing. And
yeah,
you say it's been around since iOS 16, but whatever happened with iOS 17 made it worse because I hadn't experienced it this much, right? We're talking about maybe 2 to 3 times in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this last week about our concerns about the stability of the ecosystem, right?
Yes.
I think it's actually getting worse. I don't think it's getting better. I've started
Yeah.
to, it feels like, that's the only thing I can say because I can't scientifically do this, right?
Hmm.
It feels like notifications are getting out of sync more.
Hmm.
And
Right.
I had an issue that we'll talk about here in a minute in our tips where I had to sign out of my Apple ID on my Mac again
Hmm.
because, the copy and paste from one device to another and the focus modes weren't flowing between my Mac and everything else. Everything else was fine, but the
Yeah.
Mac wasn't. And I got to get off this Mac. I'm just, although yesterday, a little bit of a sidebar, I was listening to ATP and they were talking about backups. That's the one good thing about having a Mac somewhere in your ecosystem is you can get all of your
Mhm.
photos downloaded in
Yeah,
full res
automatically
onto the
backed up.
Mac. And then if you back it up to an external hard drive, you've got a backup of your backup kind of thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
sidebar there. But so I wonder if this is something I thought, okay, maybe it's when it's trying to do an iCloud backup. I thought maybe something's choking in standby mode, but my iPad mini doesn't have standby
Yes.
mode, right? So there's something going on in there. I haven't checked today, but Apple hasn't said anything about it, but it's getting enough press. It's got to be a software bug or a server
Yes.
bug or something in there,
Yeah.
right? That they just need to go in and address. The bigger problem that I've heard people say is that if it does the full reboot, are your alarms going to go off? And
And yeah,
that's a problem.
thankfully I hadn't the days that I got up, I wasn't dependent on my alarm to wake me up. But you're absolutely right. If one of my alarms don't go off, when I need it to, and I'm not really a heavy sleeper anyway, but it will cause me to wake up late.
Yeah.
So
I mean, thank goodness I wear my Apple Watch because I think I would have had issue. Well, I have a 18-month-old alarm clock that
right.
right. So, but and hopefully my wife and I, because we both have our alarms at the same time, they wouldn't go off at the same time. But this is not good, right? They need to go in
Yeah.
and they need to address this. I did notice yesterday even that my watch did a respring. I was sitting there doing some of my work and I had some music playing, of course,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden I look down, the music's still going, but the Apple logo's on my watch face. And so it had resprung. And that's how I knew it was a respring on my watch, right? Because the music was still playing directly
Yes.
off
Yeah.
my watch. So
It wasn't a
I don't
full
know.
reboot. Yeah.
They need to work on this, but there's a lot of press about that. If this is happening to you, there's not something wrong with your device that we know of yet. It's happening
Right.
to a lot of other people. We'll keep you updated as we figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Will do. So you also had some tips here about re-enabling and unlocking the Apple Watch and some things with photos and Apple Pay. What's new with Apple Pay?
Nothing's new there. So this is, I had this problem. So I just said that I had to sign out of my Mac, right? So
Yeah.
just a reminder that when you sign out of your Apple ID on any devices, there's stuff that happens. I think it's
Right.
probably worse on iPad or iPhone because there's so many things that are dependent on it, but I don't know. But at least on the Mac, I just want to, this is the second time we've talked about this on the show. If you
Hmm.
sign out of your Apple ID on your Mac and sign back in, make sure that you re enable the ability for it to unlock with your Apple Watch. You got to go
Right.
reflip the switch. If you're like me, like I just mentioned, and you want all of your photos to fully download full res, you got to go back into the
Yep.
photo settings and make sure that's set up. And then you're going to have to add your cards back for Apple Pay. They don't just automatically add
Right.
those back. So,
And
don't,
some of this is off by default for security reasons, right?
yeah,
This is stuff
yeah,
that you don't want to linger around if someone, let's say someone does your password gets compromised and they say, "Oh, let me sign back into to Greg's Apple account." Then boom, they automatically have, all your photos and all of your which they do anyway to a certain extent, but you're not backing up to that device that you sold or traded or handed down to someone or they don't automatically have all of your full credit cards back in your wallet and things like that. So a lot of this is off for security reasons.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I understand that. It's just it was a pain in the butt, and
Yeah,
it happened at a bad time because it never happens when it's convenient, right? I mean, and
yes,
so anyway, so yeah,
yeah,
just a
yeah,
reminder on that. There's your tip. If you have to sign out, and if you're doing it on your iPhone or iPad, and there are a few things that you have to do sometimes. I think what's going on with this one is for whatever reason, it's not remembering that my Mac is part of my set of devices on the back end. This goes back to this ecosystem
right,
that's maybe not as stable as it needs to be with all of
yeah,
these updates
yeah.
that they've done. So,
So and you will have to do that from time to time, signing back in or signing out of your iCloud and signing back in. Sometimes, like we always say, Apple says it just works until it doesn't. So
yeah.
you will have
That
to do it someday.
that was fine when they were simple, right? I mean, but
Right.
these everything is so complex now, and we want it
It is.
complex,
It
right?
is.
On their end. We want all of
Right.
this stuff. I want continuity. I want all of my devices to talk to each other, but that adds
Right.
complexity, so is what
It
it
does.
is.
It does. And getting all this stuff to constantly stay in sync, like you said, continuity and being able to access your passwords and messages in the cloud and things like that, having everything appear the same way on every device. It is um, pretty magical if you think of it, but
Yeah.
we don't want to see that on our end, right? IT, we make things invisible for the user. And when things go wrong like that, we kind of notice that, hey, there's something going on that's not right.
Yeah. Nobody wants to see that the wizard behind the curtain is just a
Right.
man. Ignore the man
This man
behind the
pulling a
curtain.
bunch of levers. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
So, well, yeah, that was a good tip. I think most people are going to run into issues like that. Some things will be solved. A lot of the simpler things will be solved by just signing out and signing back in. So that fixes a lot. It's kind of like I always mention that episode or all the episodes of the IT crowd when they call IT and he answers the phone with, "Did you restart the device? Hey, thank you for calling IT. Did you restart the device?" So start with that. If something's not syncing right or acting a little wonky, just sign out and sign back in. And remember to do all the things that Greg just mentioned. So
Yep. So, Jason, I have a question for you, though, while we're in this current stuff and tip section.
yeah,
So, I mentioned to you that I happened to bump a small sledgehammer into my phone that was in my pocket, and it took a
I
very,
remember.
very small chip out of the front screen protector. Thank goodness I had
Yeah,
the screen protector on. Taking a sledgehammer to a phone, not a good idea, but I had to have the little mini sledgehammer thing out there for some work I was doing around the house. But then you
right.
mentioned that you've already destroyed. You put this back screen protector on what 2 weeks ago at the most, and it's
Right,
dead.
right. It was the night before we went aboard the cruise ship, right? So that Friday before, and I noticed by the time we got off of the ship on the way home, I noticed there was a big, pretty large crack in it, right? And I didn't do much that week. We walked around from restaurant to restaurant to seat, and somehow it still managed to get a pretty large crack. So fast forward that another week, I was actually home. I was back to work and things like that. I pulled it off yesterday and it was smashed pretty good. Now this is just the back. The front is still fine. Just the back screen protector. So and I tried a different brand this time, although it looked very similar, right? These companies they all buy the same product. They kind of rebrand it. So um, sticking in their box with their company logo or whatever.
Yeah, they buy
So
these
I'm
big
assuming it
they
was the
buy these
same.
big sheets of tempered glass, right? And then they
Right,
have tools that cut them in whatever shape they want, put the sticky on
right.
them however they want, and then there you go. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. They ship them out, but they're practically all the same, right? Unless we go with the more expensive brands, right? They'll have their own process of making theirs. But anyway, the cheap Amazon ones, they're all the same. But this one, this time around, I didn't even get a full 2 weeks of use out of it before it was smashed so much that I had to pull it off. Now, it starts doing those little micro chips, right? All
yeah.
tempered glass does it. And this one was to the point where it started to chip to the point too, also pulling it off, it actually tore up, peeling it off of the back. So really, really bad shape. No scratches or dents or anything like that. I don't know how these cracks appeared. The install went on. It went on really good, and it was on really secure, and it looked really good this time. I was like you mentioned, you had the little bubble around the Apple logo and stuff. I was wondering, was that going to happen to me? No, it went on really good. It looks really good on the phone. I couldn't live with the cracks and all of that. So I have two more of them. I hadn't put it on yet, but I'll put it on.
So you're still going to go caseless, right?
Yes, yes. I'm still gonna just use the front and back protectors. Also, I have the camera cover too, like you have,
Yeah.
the one you did the short on. I have that one. That one has some chips in it, but as long as those little chips don't affect my picture taking, I'll leave it on until it's ready to come off. And I have like three more of those too.
Yeah. I mean, that's the nice thing about all this. I was listening to another podcaster, Mike Hurley on Upgrade, dropped
Hmm.
his 15 Pro Max in the bathroom on the tile.
Oh,
And he said
how'd
he
it
didn't
do?
just drop it. He said it kind of launched. So it went forward and hit and bounced. And he doesn't have anything on his.
Okay.
No front, no back, no nothing. And it's fine, except for on the back, it seems like it must have bent the titanium just a little bit because there's a
Uh,
little sharp kind of thing
yeah.
right on the one of the back edges. So, I mean, at least it stood up to that. I mean, you and I were a little worried when we were watching all these people destroying these devices and what
Right.
was it
Right.
really going to do. But so I love being caseless. This device is just such a joy to use, right? It feels good, it looks good, and so but I think my back screen protector might have to come off because that back glass is slicker than that subtle, texture of
Right.
that subtle texture on the back, and I think it's just slick enough that when I set it on the MagSafe charger in my truck, that the vibrations make it turn. And about every
Right.
5 minutes, I'm having to reach up and straighten up the phone because my OCD kicks in. So,
Yep. Yeah, yeah, I know that's a little annoying. It does affect the magnet just a tad bit, not much. It'll still be secured, but
yeah.
have you hit any humps or anything and it popped off of there or
Nah, I mean, I don't
no?
drive a whole lot. I had the oil change yesterday, and I was talking to the guy at the service station, and
Mhm.
told him that I think I filled up my truck probably 6 weeks ago at this point,
Yep.
and I still have 3/4 of a tank of gas.
Right.
So I don't go very far now. I mean, we're gonna drive it. We're going camping this weekend, so I'll test it then, and we'll see. And that'll be a little bit bumpy because I'll be pulling the camp trailer. So we'll see if it
Okay.
does. If that happens, I'll definitely be pulling that. One of two things. The other option that I have is when I'm going on long trips like that, just
Mhm.
throw it in the case to
Right.
put on the MagSafe in the truck, right, and then take it out of the case when I get out of the car. It's not a
Yeah.
big deal. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that'll be fine. And you usually, especially when you're going camping or doing some outdoor stuff, you usually have a case prepared for it anyway. So
yep, and I do. I have that Spigen case with the sliding door over the camera. That's the camping case, so it'll be fine.
yeah.
I have one other thing for you too, because you prompted this one. So I was in looking at our message thread, and it said there's an updated contact photo available for Jason. Now it looked exactly the same as the existing one, right?
Okay.
And so I hit update, but then it went away, and all I had were your initials on my Mac. It
Okay.
was okay on my phone and everything, but all I had were your initials. And for my pinned message threads,
Hmm.
that drives me crazy. No, I got to have a
Right.
photo, not
Right.
anything else. So I went in and when I tapped on your contact photo, not the poster, right, but the contact photo, there were two options, and I didn't realize these were even there. Maybe they've been there all along, but maybe this was a recent update. And one of them
Mhm.
said um, custom photo update manually, and that's the one that was
Mhm.
checked. And then the other one said or asked to update. Custom photo ask each time to update, whatever the verbiage was.
Right.
And then the second option above that that was not checked was default. So I think that what Apple has done there is that I can go in and say, like, you could do this because I know you have a very specific photo of me that you were
Right.
using, right? You could go in and say, I'm using a custom one, only update Oh, ask me to update and I can say yes or
Yep,
no.
ask me
Or
to
you
update.
could say whatever they put up there is the new photo, just push it out to me. So I think there's an
Right,
option in there to tweak that now, which makes me feel a little bit better about the privacy implications of allowing just
right.
anybody
We
that
talked
has
about
your
that
contact.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
So
hadn't seen that.
so I had that issue before because remember I told you some late in the beta it kept changing your photo automatically, right, to the one that you have, and not my custom one. So it would change on the phone directly. On the iPad, it would just switch it to your photo, which was kind of annoying. Not that I mind, but like you said, for your pink conversations, you want those to be, the photos you want because it shows the little bubble on there. So yeah, yeah. So I experienced that once. It corrected itself in a few hours, right? Your photo is fine, but I refuse to use your photo. I want to use mine, and it's not just you. It happens with my brother. Um, Also, my group chat with my brothers. We constantly keep changing. I told you we have that old album cover on there. They constantly keep changing it weekly anyway. So it always annoys me when I open up iMessage and that photo is changed anyway. But imagine opening that and three of your photos or
Yeah.
four of them are changed. So yeah, yeah, I think that's a good addition. I don't remember that particular setting originally. I just remember it asking if I wanted to keep or revert back to. You hit revert and it has like a little coin flipping, and it goes back to your original
Yep.
photo. So yeah, yeah, really good feature. So it does make you kind of relax a little bit. People don't have that much control over the changes on your phone, right? Because they shouldn't, right? Even if it's your wife or your friends and family, we shouldn't be able to change the photos on your phone unless you allow it. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good addition.
I agree.
All right, Greg. So this week for catch up, like I said, we're going to talk about our journey up into episode 19, and just kind of get an idea of where we're at with the show, some of the changes we made, some of the things that we've learned, and stuff like that. But before we dive into that, let's do a brief catch up this week and give people a brief history of why we started the show. Well, how did the show get started? Maybe because we've been talking about this for years now. And let's finish that off with who the show is for.
Yeah. I mean, I had, we love tech. Jason and I, if you go back to some of our early episodes, you'll know that we launched the, for the Fortune 500 company that we worked for, we launched their mobile efforts and pried the Blackberries out of people's fingers and put iPhones in their
Right.
hands and all of that
Right.
kind of stuff. So we love tech. And at one point, I actually had a little blog that I did called Gadgets for Families, and it was fun. I'd put out like one newsletter a month, and
Right.
kind of was good because most of the executives wanted it, and so it actually solved problems before they crept up on us.
Right.
Um, but then, time went by. That company changed. Both of us aren't there anymore. And I started a podcast in January of this year around some leadership stuff, and then got serious about talking to Jason and saying, okay, now's the time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now is the time for us to do this. So I think that was probably the biggest thing from my perspective. What about yours?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was even when we were doing the newsletter, right? It was so much fun. It was so much fun. And we talked about even way back then, hey, we should record this. We should make a podcast about the newsletter. And then it was iOS focus, right? We talked a lot because we've always been Apple guys from the very beginning. We kind of bonded over Apple devices and things, but we talked a lot about other stuff going on, a lot about gaming, a lot about just tech in general, and it it only made sense for us to be in this position that we're in now, right? That was always just going to be a natural evolution of the newsletter. So um, my only regret is not getting started sooner,
Yeah.
right? Can you imagine where we would be now if we would have started? It may have changed the landscapes of our careers, years ago. But we're not going to dwell on the past. We're here now. We're moving forward, and yeah, it's been a good journey ever since.
Yeah. I think, kind of what we want the show to be, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what we've done that went well and didn't. But I
Mhm.
had a listener that told me that I like when you guys talk, I
Right.
understand what you're saying, right? And so if I think about who this is for, yes, we've used some terms and we talk about ecosystems and we talk about a bunch of stuff like that, but we try and keep this as simple as possible so that
Right.
anybody can listen to the show and it can help them. And so that's what we had to do, right? I mean, we had senior executives that knew how to power on their phones but didn't know a whole lot beyond if somebody calls I press the green button, if I want to call
Yes.
somebody I tap on their name, right? This was pre big messaging and Slack and all of that kind of stuff where you did everything on these mobile devices. I mean, they were literally
Yeah.
using them as mobile phones. And we would have executives that would come to us and say, I only want to carry an iPad. How do I make that work? And
Right.
Jason and I could make it work, because we were geeky enough that we could RDP into a Windows session or whatever the case may be. But I still
Yes.
remember one of the Apple executives that was in charge of the international stuff that, not a, did I say Apple executive? Not an Apple executive, but one of the executives
Yeah.
that was in
The
charge of
one
the,
execs at the
yeah, yeah,
company.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he was just like, I just need this to be as simple as possible, but this is how I want to do my stuff. And so, you know, iPad and keyboard and all that kind of stuff. But we did have to make it because we would get a call at 2 a.m. from him from a foreign
Yes.
airport saying, I can't do something, and we'd have to deal
Right.
with it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So, and one of the early episodes, go back and listen to it. We talked about how things weren't as easy back then, right? We have iCloud and we have, so many different features that we didn't have back then. So it was kind of, we were just kind of grouping together a bunch of apps just to make things work. And always referred to it as the Wild West. It kind of was back then. And things didn't work as smoothly as they do now. So, but yeah, this is who we made the show for, so that's a good way to get into who the show is for. So we think about our clients, and we always make the joke, we call them clients, but we're talking about our family and friends and neighbors and stuff like that. um, how do we make things easier for them, right? To be able to gather knowledge for it, because we're always in a position of support, right? I'm like you. We go to a family function with all the in-laws and all of that, and they all pull out their phones and they're like, "Here, my phone is doing this," or "Hey, the printer's doing that," or "My laptop's doing something weird." We're just a family IT guy, right?
yeah.
So we knew that there were a lot of us out there, right? Not just two dads who worked in IT before, but also moms trying to manage all of their kids' devices, right? Also, just tech dads who love technology and stuff, but they work full time and a lawyer or construction or something like that. But they still have this family of devices that they have to manage. So we wanted to be able to reach these guys and help them out and still have fun doing the show too. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I've told you the story. I won't name the family member, but they've got a $500 Apple Watch sitting on their wrist for
right.
2 years or whatever it was at this point. And I was talking about something and then went, wait, what? I can change the data that I see
Yeah.
on that watch face?
I
And I
remember
went,
this. Yep.
oh, and if I think about that, one of the problems that Apple's ecosystem has and their different operating systems has is they have become so complex that
Yes.
discoverability is a challenge, right? I
Right.
mean,
Right.
they can't pop up a splash screen. And what a splash screen is, right, is that initial screen that pops up when you turn on a device that says, here's all the things that are new. They can't go
Right.
through them. I mean, the PDF that Apple has for iOS 17 changes is pages and pages and pages and pages long. So they
Right.
can't do
Right.
that. So all they're doing is highlighting the main cool features like widgets everywhere, right?
Right.
And for most people, if they just want their devices to do what they need to do, they're not going to pay attention to the geeky stuff. And so, if I think about that person not knowing that they could change and put the temperature
Yes.
outside, right, on their watch face, and that's important to them because of some of their outside activities, going, okay, that is not maximizing the technology. Put aside how much you spent on it, right? But it's
Yeah.
not maximizing the technology. And so not to get too philosophical here, but when I launched Leaders Lift, my goal there was to help people to get more out of life. Right.
Yes.
And as I talked to you, and I talked to another mutual friend of ours that lives in Tennessee, and talked about what
Hmm.
I'm good at it as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in this next phase in my career, that's one of the things that came out is I like to help people get more out of their
Right.
lives, right? And
Right.
so this became a natural extension of that because technology is such a big part of our lives. And
Yes.
not to go on my social media is killing the world rant, but there is so much negative that can happen with social media or with social media, yes, but also with
Yeah.
technology, right? You can have it control you. You can have this amazing piece of technology and have no idea how to take advantage of it. But if you learn just
Right.
some simple things, you don't need to know all the geeky stuff that we do. It can transform your experience in your life. If I think about my grandmother that lives in Colorado that we see once or twice a year,
Hmm.
got an iPhone and I said, "Oh, watch this." And I shared a photo album with her and she went, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Every
Yeah.
time I take a picture of the grandkids, you'll get it." And she's like, "What?" I mean, if she had known that was available, she would have bought that iPhone years
Yes.
before, right? Because
Yeah.
do they want to be involved in the grandkids' lives? Yes. So that goes into this getting more out of life. And if I think about my family starting to spread out a little bit more and the grandkids getting a little older, by the way,
Hmm.
the 18-month-old has an iPad now. My mom
Yeah.
had a really, really old iPad. And so we've reformatted that and he's using that at the moment. I can't even put Disney Plus on it, Jason, because it's on iOS
Wow.
12 point whatever with the security updates, and Disney requires 15 something to
Yeah.
start with. But a bunch of his PBS stuff anyway is on there. But if I think about my family expanding and spreading out and stuff like that, I want all of us to get the most out
Yeah.
of our technology. So that's who I think this is for. If you just want your technology to work, but you want it to do what you need it to, and you want to really take advantage of it, we can help.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. That's exactly what we wanted to do with the show. I think that's kind of our mission statement is to get people to use their devices for more than what you know the face value is, right? So many people say, I have a phone, it makes phone calls. But did you know you can also keep up with your grandchildren? And your phone will automatically let your family know when you make it home, after a family event or something like that. Or you can make all these awesome photos or videos. And yeah, there's so much more than just phones. And we want to help people get the most out of that. So yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. I think that was well said.
I'll give you a
So
little
I
hint here. My phone icon
Mhm.
is not in my dock anymore on my
Really?
phone. Yeah. So
I
we'll
so
talk about that on customizations, but
yeah,
I think there are more and more people that are like that, right? That they aren't using the phone
yeah,
feature. And I come from a generation of phone callers. I mean, we joke around, my wife and
right,
I joked with the kids about how when we were dating in high school, how she would have to sit in the hall because the cord on the phone wouldn't reach clear
right.
into her bedroom. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, but so mine by default from the very first iPhone all the way up until my 14 Pro Max, I always kept that phone icon down in the bottom left-hand corner. It's just always been there, it's just muscle memory. But now that I think about it, I don't really tap on that icon nowhere near as much as I tap on some of the other ones. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that. I may be moving mine too. I may be moving several things down there that I keep down there just out of habit
Yeah.
that I don't use anymore. So, yeah, yeah, we'll get into that later on. So,
And somebody in our audience is going, wait a minute, I can change the four icons that are down in that part of
right,
my phone.
right. Yes, yes, you can change your dock. So customization is always a good topic because we can talk about so many different things.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah, we'll get into that in the post show. So and let me say too before we move on, I noticed with kids, they'll quickly so we're talking about your grandson. Um, I think he'll notice pretty quickly that his iPad just doesn't do what grandpa's iPad does. and that's going to force an upgrade. So it's a good start.
It was a stopgap until we see what Apple does with the upgrades. Because even last night,
Right.
he was we're trying to get him to go to sleep, and Karen's there trying to watch a show on her iPad, and I'm reading on mine, and he's pointing to Karen's iPad, going mine, mine, because he thinks it's his, right? So yeah,
Right. So, but you're right. That is, and we talked about because there's iPads incoming, right? Whether they're going to be the entry level, new Airs, new Minis, and definitely new Pros next year. Now is not the right time to go and purchase a brand new iPad unless you have to. But if you can, if you have an option like Greg where you can find an old iPad or something like that to give to a grandchild, then definitely do that. So, um, but yeah, he'll notice pretty quickly that hey, this doesn't do what grandma's iPad does. So, again, before we jump into the main topic, do all the things, subscribe, share, do all of that stuff for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for listening as usual. You guys, you really make this thing. Uh, Seeing the progression and the increase in the numbers and stuff. That's always motivating for us guys. So thank you everyone out there who's sharing it and listening every week. So the main topic, what we've learned, changes we've made, everything we've done in our journey from episode 1 plus because we had the launch episodes too, all the way up to 19. So I thought we'll take a good, the bad, and the ugly kind of approach to this thing, right? And not necessarily ugly as in things that were terrible because I couldn't think of, too many bad things. So there was nothing ugly. So I'll say instead of ugly, we'll just replace that with things that just didn't make the cut, right? Some things that we wanted to do that just didn't make it. So there were some changes, definitely if you listen from episode 1 through 5, you'll notice that 6 through 7 or 6 through 8 is totally different because we made a lot of changes, right? So let's just jump into it and talk about some of the things. So let's start with the good, of course, right? Let's always start with good news here. So one of the biggest changes that I think we made is when we loosen up the show, right? You mentioned you got that feedback of saying that do you understand? They understand better when we just talk about things like that. So I remember getting some feedback too about we sound more relaxed, right? When we talk about things that we enjoy and all of that, instead of just following the structure. So for me, one of the biggest changes was when we stopped just following that script and following the outline to a T, right? And I started, I would put down what I want to put, when we talk about the different sections or whatever in the outline of whatever topic, I would put down just the general things I wanted to cover, but I stopped trying to read it like a script, right?
yeah.
And following it to a T, I kind of ad lib a little bit. And I know sometimes I kind of explain things a little long, or I'll go on and be a little long winded about certain answers, but I think that was one of the biggest changes that we made was stop being so stiff, as they say, when it comes to recording an episode. What do you think?
Yeah, I went through this transition with Leaders Lift too.
Yeah,
That one actually was kind of forced on me because I just couldn't keep. I used to write out every word of Leaders Lift, which is 20 to 30 minutes, right? And
yeah,
the whole thing was scripted out, which was great because then I would just publish it as the transcript. But
yes,
that did some things. I would go back and try and fix things when I didn't say them the way I wrote them and all that kind of stuff. And so for a couple of episodes, I just went, here's my outline. I'm just going to talk, and I was worried that the shows would be much, much shorter and that the quality would be worse. And all the feedback I got there was that no, it's just
yeah,
as good from a quality standpoint, and it's more relatable, right? It makes it feel a little more human. So
yeah,
I think that was really good. Um, for those of you that don't know Jason and I really well, we actually are pretty different in a lot of areas, and this is one
right,
of them. Jason is way more go with the flow, relax. I am way
right,
more OCD, right?
yeah,
Things need to be just the way, and it just is what it is, which is actually why we worked really well together in a lot of instances because I could handle a lot of the details and making sure everything went the way it was supposed to, and he could just deal with stuff, right?
Right.
And so that came out, and I think we've got a decent happy medium because we still have some structure, right? We still have some structure in
We do.
here. We're not writing everything out. And if you just, even if you just went back and listened to all 19 openings, the Welcome to Gadgets for Families, the Tech Podcast 4,
Yeah.
right? You'll see that that's kind of transformed, and we've been having some fun with that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, I think that was really good to not have to worry about it being so perfect and so formal.
Yeah.
And I think that also lends itself well to some of the video work that we're doing, right? I mean, part of it is we
Right.
just don't have the equipment, the time, the expertise to do MKBHD level stuff,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And so just right out from the beginning saying, hey, we're not going to do all of that, but then having so much structure and having it be so exact, those two things I don't think meshed well. So now
Yeah.
we're saying, hey, we're going with the flow, and you're going to hear us cough and sneeze, and my sinuses are always a horrible issue, and I try to get all of that stuff out during the edit process, but
Yeah.
it's never going to be perfect, especially when we talk about video. And then we go into the show and we're more relaxed and not so worried about all of that kind of stuff and can
Right.
just talk tech. I
Yeah.
mean, with his new camera angle, you said that I kind of look like a radio show host. That's what
Yep.
radio show hosts used to do, right? It was just unscripted, it was just conversation, and that's the way it went. So I think it was a good
Yeah.
move.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. So, so, so we talked about how it from a editing standpoint, it did improve once we relax and all of that. So I think so too. I think part of it is yes, we've improved. Well, I've improved because we'll talk about that later. But you had a bit of a head start. But I've improved. So we don't have as many edit points,
Yeah.
right? And I know the video is pretty raw. You do see a lot of the background talking and all of that. And y'all know you'll edit a lot of that out. But yeah, can you remember some of those early episodes? You would have several edit points that you would have to pull out, and things with me having to explain stuff, and I'm like, you know what, that just didn't come out as clear as I wanted to, and we would re-record that whole section over again. Now it's not much of that, right? We just
No.
kind of go with it, and from an editing standpoint, I think they kind of made it easier on you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about my processes later, but I always
Yeah,
kind of set aside Tuesdays as my Gadgets for Families Day because that's the day we record. We drop the episode on Wednesday, but we're recording it on Tuesday. And it used to be that it was, 6 to 8 hours of work just to produce the podcast, just the audio
right,
version of the podcast, record, edit, and publish out there. And now I can spend that same 6 to 8. Last week it was 10 hours recording, editing and
right,
publishing the podcast, editing and publishing the full video, editing and publishing all of the video segments, including some
right.
shorts and that kind of stuff. And so, from a time standpoint, it's about the same amount of time, but we're putting more content out there, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah, I mean, it's making a huge difference, and um, I still remember the day when people were asking Tim Cook why they were spending so much money to help the environment and all of this kind of stuff, and his words were, "If you don't like that approach, get out of the stock." And
right.
same kind of thing. There are people that want the MK. I watch MKBHD, right? There are
Yeah,
people that want that kind of high production value stuff, and that's great. If that's all you want, we're probably not going to be the podcast for you for quite some time.
yeah,
But if you want to be
yeah,
like that feedback that we got, that it's just a couple of guys talking about tech and it's relatable and relevant, that's what we hope to be.
yeah. So that was some of the good things about it, and just to sum that up, I think the biggest change was to not be so structured, right? Not be so stiff and set in stone. Anything else you wanted to add to that?
Just just to plug for the YouTube stuff, right? That's something that we've done recently. If you go onto our
Yeah.
YouTube channel now, we're going to put each episode in as a playlist. So what we're trying to do is publish the whole show,
Mhm.
which last week was over 2 hours, and then certain
Yeah.
segments out of that week's episode. So we'll publish those, and then if we do any and then we'll publish shorts. But the segments in the show itself will go into a playlist. So you'd be able to go in and see episode 20 and see all of the videos that are episode 20 related. Now, I haven't seen how I
Hmm.
can put shorts into playlist yet. That might be possible, and I just haven't figured it out. So any of the
Hmm.
shorts are going to be outside of that, but definitely anything longer than a minute is going to end up in that playlist if it's related to that week's topic. So check that stuff out. I enjoy it. Um,
Yeah.
it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, I think. And I like the content out there. And, um, there are people that consume podcasts that way. Right.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah, YouTube has a big push now for their YouTube podcasting, right? So same shows or whatever that you watch, you can listen to them in podcast form. I thought that was pretty cool.
and some of them are just, they put up their graphic and it's just background audio for an hour or whatever the case may be. That's not what we're doing. We're
Right.
actually, you can see us for better or for worse, for good, bad, or ugly. You can see us.
Right,
So,
right. We're here. So let's go ahead and let's talk about some of the bad. I like I said, we the ugly section doesn't really, I was just saying with that name, that naming convention because of the movies, but um, there's not really much bad for me, at least. So, what about you?
so I think one of the things we thought we wanted to do, and we still enjoy doing this, which is a
Hmm.
little bit of a struggle for us, but doing audio only versions of in-depth tutorials. So if I think back to the 2 episodes we did on the settings app,
Right,
right, and being able to go in and tweak our settings and stuff, we thought that would be a niche that we wanted to go in and fill. And
yeah,
audio only versions of that, it just didn't feel right. Right. It didn't
right.
feel like it was going to be effective. It didn't feel like it was really going to help people improve whatever they were doing. And I can see that to a
Yeah,
certain extent. That's probably better for something that's visual, whether that be text or video, right? To be able
right,
to do some of that kind of stuff. And, some of the shorts we've done on tutorials, like changing the haptic touch settings and navigating your Apple Watch and stuff like that, when we've done video, has gone very, very well. So, I think that was one thing that was bad, right? I mean,
right,
it's not bad in terms of it was horrible and it made the podcast a failure and we gave up,
right.
but it didn't feel like that. And I go a lot on my gut. You know this about me,
Hmm.
right? And so
Yeah,
we produced those episodes and afterwards just went, that didn't feel
right.
like we thought it would. So we moved on.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the same because when you came up with the idea, I'm like, that is really great. Let's focus on and kind of just focus in on certain things. But um, I think where we went wrong, and I could be wrong too, but I think focusing, trying to get everything in, right? I would say too when we were recording, like I kind of want to get all the important things in, and I hate for the show to be so top heavy, I guess to use a term, right? We cram in all of this information, and then the bottom half we're just rushing through because we're already an hour and 40 minutes in, and we're not even halfway through all of the feature set, or
Right.
halfway through. And I hated it. It seems like we were trying to do something, and it just came out really. Like we were just reading a technical manual to someone, right? And not everyone's looking for that type of content. So you're right. That was one of the things that stood out to me. That was a really good idea, and it still would be an awesome idea in video form, right, or short form, or something like that. But just not on the show. So that
I think
was
there are two things with that, right? One is, I mean, we didn't know if we were going to be able to do this every week. Right.
right.
And so you're thinking, okay, I got to get all of this stuff in. I mean, like settings, we split into 2 episodes, but that was one thing. We didn't know if we were going to be able to get it in every single week.
Yeah,
And then we didn't have any other forum to try and share this information we thought was important. But now we have shorts and videos and the
and the
blog
blog, and
posts
yep.
and all of this other stuff. And so, not to jump ahead to what we have in store for episodes 21 through 100 plus, but I think going forward, we can still work on that and say, this is good for the show, this is good for supplemental content,
Right.
right? And split some things out.
Yeah. So for me, I thought long and hard about the bad, right? And this was actually when outlining the episode, I kept coming back to this section. I filled in everything else. I went back to the intro. I went down to the post show. I jumped all over. And I kept coming back to this because, again, there was nothing really bad um, about, recording. Just a few, like, just minor little annoyances that would come up, right? So, again, nothing really major, but for me, I think the SharePoint, how it makes me log in every week, right? Just a
Yeah.
minor annoyance. And again, I know and I appreciate security, right? I appreciate two-factor authentication. I appreciate being able to just type in a code or whatever that's from a text message or something like that. But not as much as I enjoy just clicking on an email link and it logging you in automatically. That's the best form of two-factor authentication to me. But um, so logging into the SharePoint just to upload my audio and video and stuff every week was kind of annoying. Another thing, the limitations using an iPad Pro, right? Remember I told you I was committed to being able to record a podcast on just my iPad. That way, even if I had to record on the road or out or something like that, I'll still be able to do it. So just being faced with some of the limitations, and there's not many because the iPad Pro is awesome, right? I'm never gonna down talk my favorite product. So,
Well,
but
we're going
it
to
is
talk
pretty
about
good.
that. I put a note in here for later to talk about in the future. So let's hold on
Mhm.
that because I want to talk about that a little bit in depth because I want off my Mac. So
Yes,
so we can
yes,
talk about that when we get down to that section.
yeah, yeah. We'll go into that. Another one is having my phone tied up for Zoom, right? So, and again, we'll talk about the limitations of the iPad, but not being able to record audio and video two separate channels on just the iPad. And again, the camera's not awesome. When we talk about hardware, I'll mention using an external camera and stuff like that, which I'm going to get into. But having my phone tied up and it doing things like going through um, the settings episode where we were talking about settings and different things, and I remember getting hung up on trying to remember how Apple worded some of the things or whatever. And it's not as quick to just go and Google a screenshot of how this setting looked and things like that while we're recording. So being able to have a separate device and not having to have my phone tied up the whole time is another thing that's forcing me to consider some changes that I'm going to make, and we'll get into that with hardware. Um, Also, a better keyboard too. This keyboard that I'm using for my iPad that's docked while we record is actually a keyboard for Microsoft Surface. It's not an iPad keyboard, right? So I have the Apple Magic keyboard with the dock, but it's like a clamshell kind of setup, right? Arrangement. So it's absolutely useless when you have your phone or you have your iPad dock connected to a monitor. So really, really, really weird. It functions pretty good, but I also have to keep it sitting here in my lap, and it dies sometimes. It disconnects from the iPad, and I have to turn it off, turn it back on. So just minor stuff like that, and that's all going to be improved as I improve our hardware, setups and things like that. So nothing really bad for me, other than like I said, the changes that we already mentioned that we made, and then these minor annoyances that come up. So let's talk about some of the ugly. And again, I say ugly here just to keep that naming convention, just like the show. But there's nothing really ugly about filming the show. So let's talk about some of the things that didn't make the cut, right? Um, we wanted to do or we thought would be a good idea that just didn't seem to work out, or we never introduced them. And I always go to this from the very beginning when we said we were going to start filming a podcast. One of the early podcasts that I shared with you that we listened to was from the Twit Network, and it was Tech News Daily,
Tom
right?
Merritt.
Yeah, yeah, Tom Merritt and I forget some of the other guys, but it was a whole team, and we loved those guys, and they would keep us up to date on all the tech news every day. But the first half of the show, I would say the first 10 minutes or so was either like a rumor roundup or like a news roundup, right? And they would speed round us, just kind of um, each take a different topic, and they would give the headline, and just give a brief description of what they think. And if it was important enough, all of them would comment, and then it would move on to the next topic. I wanted to do something like that, and we still have a news and current stuff section, right, where we talk about the current things. But I also wanted to include things like gaming and stuff like that. And because of the topics that we chose, we were always pressed for time. Remember, I talked about some of the episodes being so top heavy because we want to include everything, and then the last part of the main topic, we're rushing through it, and eventually we split that out into the post show and started adding things. But I always wanted a new section like that, and we never got around to just making that just right.
Yeah, and this conflicts with my next one, which is keeping the show to 1 hour, which we're still
Right.
working on, right? But it again, if I think about your equipment setup, right, and you'll talk about that
Mhm.
in a bit, and how we're approaching these things, I mean, we just didn't know if we were going to be able to make this work. Put aside how many
Yes.
people listen, whether it's profitable, any of those kinds of things. We just didn't know if logistically we were going to be able to make this happen. And those logistics are getting a little more complicated as both of our lives seem to get a little more complex outside of just this
Mhm.
podcast. But it's hard to figure that kind of stuff out. And so, if we want to do stuff like that, we may need to do just a headline show, right? That's
Right.
just 15 minutes of just jamming in headlines or stuff like that. And so all of those things are still on the table as long as we can logistically, right, make it all
Mhm.
work. Um, so yeah, I like that idea. We just have to figure out how, right? Because
Yes.
I do
Yeah.
think one of our challenges is a 2 hour podcast is too much, right? There are very
Right.
few podcasts that I listen. There's only one that I listen to that's that long, and
Yes.
so we've broken out into bonus episodes and done some other stuff. So we're going to keep fiddling with all of this stuff, and who knows what it's going to look like, right? We may end up with every other week show that's an hour long, and all weeks we've got a 15-minute drop, or who knows. I
Right.
mean, we'll keep
Right.
tweaking this, which is why we keep telling everybody, use the feedback form, tell us what you'd like to see, let us know what
Right.
works, what doesn't work, and help us with that feedback. Otherwise we're going to keep trying things that sound good to us, no idea if it works for those of you listening.
Right. Right. And it's funny you brought that up because I would say it was the same with Leaders Lift. Right. I would listen every week on the podcast app because I still use the Apple Podcasts. I know fancy people use Spotify and Overcast and things like that.
Overcast.
But yeah, so I still listen to the podcast, but I don't listen to very long shows, right? So when you started uploading the video to YouTube, which when I'm in the shop, YouTube is all day and it goes through whatever shows up in my feed. It'll just play that, play that, play that, go next. And I get caught up on everything during the week. Well, when Leaders Lift would show up in my feed, that was perfect for me. But then we continued to still produce audio only for G4F. And it was just kind of weird. Like I'm making a show which I don't consume myself, in that way. I didn't have time to listen to our full 2 hours, and I'm sure a lot of people were like that.
Yeah.
So I think we have the right idea with how we've been chopping it up, making these bite sized. Well, some of them are not quite bite sized, right? But 20 minutes is a lot easier to consume on a single topic than it was to sit down
Yeah.
and listen to a 2 hour show. So
Yeah, and that's
good
our
direction with that.
challenge. Our challenge will be to figure out how to logistically make that happen, right? Because
Right, right,
both of us have. I mean, if y'all want to go subscribe to the Patreon or drop us Venmo tips or whatever the case may be, you can do all that
right,
in the show
right.
notes. If you want to go do enough of that Jason and I don't have to have other things to do,
Oh
rock
yeah.
on, right? Feel free.
This
We will
we would
not
make this
stop you.
show perfect.
Yeah, but but we have other stuff. So, the question is, how do we logistically make these things happen? So, again, send in the feedback, tell us what's most important. That way we focus on those things rather than
Yeah,
something else.
right. So let's jump into equipment changes, right? So you kind of had a head start because you were already recording Leaders Live, right? You already had a few months of trying to get used to recording with your hardware and things like that. So what are some of the changes that you had to make specifically for G4F that either worked or didn't work?
I think the biggest thing is that because I didn't do video for Leaders Lift at the beginning
Right.
either, right? And so the video is what has driven most of my changes. So I'm right now I've got my it's over here. I'll block it. There you go. You can see
Yeah.
my hand moving in for those of you watching the video. There you go. But
Yep.
I've got my 12 Pro as my webcam using continuity camera plugged in because it just didn't seem to be good enough uh, on wireless. It might be now that I'm not
Yep.
doing anything else on that phone, but I have to close all the apps on the phone, otherwise I get some latency. So that was the biggest thing because this LG webcam that I've had for about 4 years now, that was fine for business meetings, just doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the biggest thing. I've tried a couple of different tripods, haven't found one that I like. For Leaders Lift, I've got this clamp thing. I don't know where it is. Oh, it's back here. It's hiding. So this
Mhm.
is a clamp piece that I have that actually clamps onto my monitor.
Yes.
And because for Leaders Lift, I'm straight on, right? It's a little more um,
Hmm.
professional oriented, and so that clamps and put my phone on there. That I use there too, but I do want a different tripod for gadgets for families, and
Hmm.
we'll see how that goes. But it's a little more casual, right? So that was the biggest change for me is figuring out how to make this not be quite so stuffy
Right.
as some of the leadership stuff. And then I've let that bleed into the leadership stuff too. So those were my biggest equipment changes. Everything else I think is pretty much the same um, as it has been.
Yeah. So I mentioned before, my house is like one big junk drawer, right, for tech. Right. So when it came time to record the podcast, I pretty much had everything that I needed. Right. Um, it's funny, even the one of the mounts, because I have two mounts here that are one holding my iPad, one holding my screen. One I bought for my wife like a year ago when she started school to dock her monitor. She never used it. It was just sitting in the box on the shelf. So that's what kind of old tech that I have just laying around, right? Not stuff that are just useless, but it's here. Microphones, things like that. Even though I did buy a mic, and that's what I found. I realized pretty quick that some of this old junk is just old, outdated tech. So I did have to not only upgrade the mic, but buy a new mic stand, right? Um, I'm looking at your mic now, the boom arm that you have. Like I had one of those, and it just with my setup, it just didn't work out holding my mic. I thought about doing the drop down, like
Yeah.
when like they're filming movies or whatever, and they have it, and it just I had to have my chair too low and things like that. So I to shorten that up, I noticed pretty quickly that it just wasn't going to work out. Um, I had to make a custom stand for my iPad, which I think I'll make a quick short about that too, because today I'll have a little extra time. I have some orders coming up, but I'll have some time today, so I'll try to. And I know I've been missing from that. We'll go into that later. Greg has really been taking the lead on that, so it kind of looks like on the YouTube, it's kind of his channel, and he has this weird guy that's showing up from time to time. But um, again, we'll get into that. But hardware wise, I did notice that I had to make some changes specifically to record the show, not just just having a bunch of old junk laying around. So um, yeah, but not a lot. Again, I had a stand. I did buy. So just to describe my desk real quick, it's not really a desk, right? It's a Harbor Freight uh, sawhorse, right? People use them in the shop and they cut wood and lay 2x4s across them and things like that. So I have that. So I don't have a desk per se where I can lean over and I'll probably do a short on that too, just to show people what I mean. So everything is kind of clamped to the sawhorse, and I sit in front. So the mic is floating, my monitors are floating here, the cameras right here in front. It's all kind of floating here in front. Then I have all the wires to the monitors and things like that running along the edge, and so everything that I purchased new has to fit within that little environment, and it's worked out. I kind of adjusted the monitor so it'll be better for me to read. Everything's kind of at an angle now. I can lean in closer to the mic, although that probably makes it a lot worse for you when my waveform is like going crazy and I'm louder. But yeah, it worked out pretty easily to get things going. You know what I mean? To start recording. So hardware wise, not a lot, but I have some things in mind for the future that I'm going to be upgrading.
Yeah, I mean, we bootstrapped the podcast, right? I
Yes.
mean, and I did the same thing with Leaders Lift. I think I spent a total of $110 on the microphone setup that I have now, and I haven't changed that. And that doesn't mean that I don't want to do things differently. And
Hmm.
maybe leading into the software portion of this, I'm just using the software that comes with my Mac or with
Right.
the
Right.
iPad, right? For now, I mean, there's other things we want to do. We'll talk about later, but that's why when I upgraded to Sonoma, I wasn't terribly concerned about upgrading to Sonoma because I'm using, I'll just jump into this from a software standpoint. I'm using GarageBand for audio to record
Hmm.
and to edit both of my podcasts. I drop Jason's audio in there, and that's where I'm editing. I'm using QuickTime and iMovie for the video stuff. So
Yeah.
nothing super fancy. I know they've got subscriptions to Logic and Final Cut now that you can do on the iPad, which would be
Hmm.
awesome if I had the 12.9. We'll talk about that later, but I'm just using the free stuff that comes with this, which is why I keep saying it's not going to be perfect, right? And
Right.
I mean, there's a ton more. I just realized there's a video stabilization feature in iMovie. Didn't know it was in there. And so, but it's pretty powerful. I mean, they've done a good job. Apple has of making it so creators can do stuff, especially on the Mac. So,
Yeah.
and then Jason and I both use Canva, and I'm using it a ton right now because every video we drop that's not a short because you can't change your thumbnails gets its own thumbnail. So I'm using
Hmm.
Canva just a ton, a ton, a ton, a ton, a ton. So what that's done is because I've been doing this, I launched Leaders Lift in January. So
Right.
I'm 10 months into this. Leaders Lift's got 30 some odd episodes. Gadgets for Families got over 20 when you add in
Hmm.
all the extras and stuff like that we've done. And so now I've got a pretty decent process, which I like. And then next year I'll probably blow it up. But
Yeah.
it really is about getting in those processes and using the tools that you're comfortable with. And sure, would I love to have 4K cameras and all of the extra stuff and those kinds of things? Yeah, I mean, that's me, right? I would like
Yeah.
things to be as good as it can possibly be, but this is good enough for now.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about it because you brought up software. So Greg handles most of the editing stuff of the show. So we'll get into the apps and the software that he uses to produce an episode. But for me, software wise, I started using GarageBand, right? And then again with the limitations with iPad Pro, which we'll talk about, it just didn't make any sense to use GarageBand, right? So there was a time limit, right? Um, I can't remember what that was. I think it was an hour, right? And then it will cut off. We have to
Yeah,
break.
if we could manage our time better, we'd probably be okay, but we can't. So
Yeah,
as
yeah. And,
you see, we're a
and for
minute
me,
15 or an hour 15 in right now. So
right, right. So, and for me, it was kind of like Android. It was just too many settings for what I needed, right? I just needed to get a good, clear quality audio track, and you were going to merge them on your end, right? When you're actually doing the editing and things like that. So it was way more than I needed, and we found that just using voice memo gave us a good quality audio recording. Now, I know in the future I'll need to have some more control and things, and we may go back to GarageBand for for different things, but we'll work that out.
I have a
But for
plan.
now,
As you can imagine, I have a plan.
yeah. Oh, I'm sure, and I know it'll work out.
Jason
So,
just
but
rolled
for
his
now, voice
eyes.
memos. So, but voice memos has been working pretty good. Now, iOS, that's a whole nother story. iOS 17, right? When we did the beta, it changed something. It started picking up everything in the room and across the house. But yeah, that's a whole nother story. So you mentioned earlier too that we were using well, you mentioned we were using Apple Notes, right? That was another software change where we were using OneNote. You and I both used it in our professional, environments. It works really good. I recommend that everyone. OneNote is a good note-taking app,
Hmm.
but it just seems like it just worked out better, uh, collaboration-wise with using Apple Notes, right? And I think the the limitations that it has, some of the trade-offs, like being able to be notified of changes and questions and things like that, it's kind of a good trade-off for me, at
Yeah.
least. I know, again, we would both rather use OneNote, but for some reason, collaborating with the show just didn't seem to work as good as we wanted it to.
Yeah, I mean, Notes isn't perfect. We both can't really do major updates in the
Right.
document at the same time and a couple of things like
Yeah.
that. OneNotes for collaboration works really well if you're part of the same organization, but Jason and
Right.
I are not, right? I mean, if
Yeah.
we wanted that to work really, really well, I'd probably have to sign Jason up as a user in my Office 365 account and give him a Mount
Right.
Nebo Consulting domain, email address, and all that kind of stuff. And none of that made sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
again, if y'all
Yeah.
want to support the podcast enough and help us get it to grow enough that this is our business, we'll fix all of these problems. But
Right.
you know, good enough is good enough, right? As much as I like to be
Yeah.
a perfectionist, I'm trying to train myself. I've been preaching this on the Leaders Left podcast. Good enough is good enough. So one or notes is good enough for what we want to do
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. So, and again, let's jump back into this. Greg handles, all of the editing and things like that. So let's talk about some of the things and the tools that you use when you're producing an episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think I already listed them, right? GarageBand, QuickTime,
Hmm.
iMovie, Canva. There's an app called Blur Video. Sometimes I use when I need to, blur out my account or something that's on my phone. I've had to do that a
Right.
couple of times. Haven't learned how to do that great, but that's really it. I try and keep it as simple as possible. We record the video. People will choke at this, but the video version of the podcast is all through Zoom.
Yes.
So, I mean, I would love to um I would love to say, Jason, you record your video, I record my video, but it's a
Right.
limitation on the iPad Pro.
Hmm.
It just isn't going to work, and we've got to have something that allows us to hear each other. So we're using Zoom for right now, and it's
Yeah.
working fine. Again, we're not about 4K. I don't need you to see every drop of perspiration that's dripping off my
Yeah.
forehead in the middle of the summer.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's pretty simple. And we'll adjust as needed. Got some good plans, I think, for when we have some time next year to do some of this
Yeah.
upgrade stuff. So,
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and we'll talk about some of the upgrades and stuff that we want to make here in a second. So I thought about now it's time to do some self-reflection, right? And let's talk about what we learned about ourselves, with the in the last 19 plus episodes.
all right. So, two things. I forgot how much fun tech could be.
Right.
Using it, teaching others. So, if we go way back to our launch episodes, we talked about how we shifted from gadgets for fun to geek out onto tools, right?
Right.
That just work. And I have just forgotten how much fun tech is. Using
Yes.
it, teaching others, sharing tips, testing, trying things, experimenting. I've returned a whole bunch of stuff to Amazon lately that wasn't great.
Right.
That's been awesome. I've also forgotten how incredibly frustrating it can be at times when you
Hmm.
start to try and push the envelope, right? Because you start to try and push the envelope, you get into weird use cases, and then you're starting to pay more attention to things. Like, if we weren't doing this podcast, I'm not sure I would have even thought about the fact that my phone was rebooting
Right.
overnight, right? I wouldn't have even gotten concerned with that. But because I'm doing research and realized other people were having the problem and we want to share it, then I get more into it. The flip side of that is I didn't spend time reading all the blog posts that I
Hmm.
wanted to read, all the following all of the people on social media that I wanted to follow. So,
Yeah.
because I just felt like it wasn't a thing. But now that I prep for the podcast and I want good content, now I can. So, forgot
Yeah.
all of those things, how good it was, but also how horribly frustrating it could be. Um, I've also realized that I like the video stuff. I like it a lot.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. You
it's,
really took a liking to that. You
yeah,
you really
especially
found
where
your
we've set the expectation that we're not striving for MKBHD level
right.
stuff right now. There's a direct conflict with that and my perfectionist tendencies. So
Right.
there is this conflict every time I go to do something. And the way I've overcome that is I just said, I'm going to do one take on the trailer and call it good. Unless it falls apart, I don't do a second take. It is what it is. And
Right.
if you guys see Jason's trailers versus my trailers, Jason spends way more time on his
Yep.
trailers than I do. I can't, because if I start down that path, I'll never come back.
Yeah.
So those are the things, right? But it has taught me that I can control some of those perfectionist tendencies and just learn to say that good enough is good enough. So
Right.
some personal growth, as well as I'm just back into the tech, and it's awesome.
Yeah. 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 I don't think we would have installed the betas too, because we hadn't in
No,
years. We wouldn't install the betas unless we were doing a show. So I agree with you there. There's some things that are, man, it just feels good to be back in the mix, with these things. So um and you're right. I do, because when I record the trailer, I'll usually have I'll write it out. It'll be a couple of paragraphs, and I try to read it through and go through perfectly. So that's usually about 20 takes.
yeah, no. So here's how it works. Jason and I will get done recording, and if I'm doing the trailer and any other shorts associated with it, about 15 minutes after we're done recording the show, I'm off to lunch.
Right.
And if Jason's doing the trailer, he'll tell me, "Okay, I'm gonna go record the trailer now." And about an hour and a half to 2 hours later, he'll tell me
Right.
it's in the folder.
Right.
So,
And I usually start right after we're recorded, right?
yep.
I'll go grab something to eat real quick or get something to drink, but I come back and I'll start recording the trailer. So yeah, I I shouldn't be so stiff with it. Like we mentioned, we try to make things a little informal, a little more laid back. So maybe I'll change the trailer today that I record. I'll change that up a little bit.
Yeah, this one's on you. We'll see. You can report
Yeah.
back next week how many takes you did.
So while we're talking about self-reflection, the number one critique or the comment that I got the most, um, early on, right? We recorded those episodes, or we put the trailer up, and I started sharing it out with friends and old coworkers and family and things like that. And they all said, not all of them, but most of them said I sounded nervous, right? So nervous to the point where I didn't sound like myself, right? To the point, even my son was listening. My wife played it for him, and he was like, "Is that Dad?" Like, I didn't sound like Dad to him. Now, there's this thing in the family that I didn't know about. They call it an Uncle Jason lecture, right? So everyone's used to hearing me
Oh,
talk. Yeah, that was the thing. I didn't know till one of my nieces came in the room, and I was talking to one of my nephews or someone else in the family. She's like, "Oh, you're getting an Uncle Jason lecture." So she said, "No." So my son knows me. I'll stand at his room door and I'll preach about anything that's going on. So for him to say, "Is that Dad?" It doesn't sound like him. I was being way too nervous. So, and it came again around I think it got better around the time when we shifted from being so stiff and me ad libbing more and to us just having natural conversations about tech is when I got more relaxed. Right, the dynamic between us when we're just talking. Greg and I have conversations before we hit record. Sometimes, 20 or 30 minutes, and then after we hit stop record, we still stay on those things, those conversations or whatever, are some of the things that I thought should be in the show, right? So I think that nervousness and that just again stop being so stiff and stuffy when it came to recording the show is when I start sounding like myself and being myself and a little more relaxed. Because, like you said, there are some big differences between us that I think I was just trying to follow that strict format that kind of just didn't allow me to be myself. So I think it's gotten better, and that's one of the things that I noticed that we improved a lot on.
yeah. Also made the shows longer.
Yeah, I think right, because I did say I could really give some long-winded answers, and I think some of those early episodes, a lot of those edit points was me saying, "You know what? That was too long. Let me record that again, but shorter this time." Remind me later too. Like I said, our conversations after we stop recording. Remind me to tell you a story too about the thing I did yesterday with recording the promos and stuff for the show. I'm going to tell you about that. So let's jump into some of our plans for episode 21 through 100. Right? Let's um, where do we see the show at this same time next year? Right? We're recording in November next year. What do you see? And again, you don't have to give away any secret plans or things that we have coming up, but what do you see the show in a few months from now, anything different? Well, I guess I'll take this. Let me jump in because I do
Yeah,
have
you
my
start.
my section here first. So I'm definitely going to be upgrading equipment, right? And again, I have a kind of an informal setup now, and I only plan on making this better, right? So I want to get the 4K camera so I can test the external camera features better, right? So I just got to find a good one with USB-C, and I can hook it to the dock and see if I can how that's going to work with the audio and the video and things like that. So without question, a new iPad Pro next year, right? I'm going to go with the newest latest version, and hopefully it has some features, some pro level features and stuff to help out podcasters or content creators and things like that. Which I'm sure it will. I don't have anything in mind specifically now that I want, but again, Apple's always good at giving us things that we didn't know we wanted, right? So I do want a bigger monitor because I mentioned last week I don't know what it's like getting old, but a bigger monitor would help me see things a lot better. You know what I mean, and being able to read. Now, iOS 17, they updated Stage Manager, and I can resize windows and stuff the way I want. So I do have my Notes app right here, front and center, and the font is a nice, good size. I could read better. But if I add 5 or 6 more inches to the monitor, that wouldn't hurt either, right? So I'm gonna upgrade that. But a new monitor is pretty far down on the list, with all the things that I want, with all the things we have coming up. I did just mention a new iPad and stuff. So hey, if I find one secondhand, a good deal or something, I'll jump on it. So um, another thing too, I mentioned, I want to get back to being able to make shorts, right? I noticed a lot of times because I said Tuesday was going to be my dedicated off day, right, from my main job, and I would take this time to, dedicate to the show and stuff like that. This is our busy season, and I noticed like for the past few weeks, like right after recording, I'm having to go in the shop and turn out orders. Now, don't get me wrong, if any of my customers are listening, I don't want you to stop ordering so I can record the show more. I really appreciate the success we're having, but man, I'm finding myself, you know, having to rush back into work. You know what I mean? And I don't get around to recording shorts and things like that. So I want to get back to Tuesday just being off day. No popcorn, no office stuff, no social media stuff, no behind the scenes with the company, and just dedicate that to one being an off day for me to relax, and then to be able to make content and stuff and contribute more to the show because yeah, if you go to the YouTube now, it's mostly just those covers that you created in Canva and faces of your, shots of your face and things like that. So I do plan on contributing more. So and and I put in here too, adding a second camera, right? I mentioned earlier that my iPhone is tied up because we're doing the Zoom here. I'm recording on the iPad and I have my monitor here. So a second camera would help me free up my phone and or adding a separate phone too, like you have a separate phone, a second phone now to be able to record and stuff like that. So I don't necessarily need it to be an iPhone, but just maybe a good 4K camera, a GoPro or something like that to help me record videos and things like that. Um, so those are my plans. What about you, Greg? What do you think?
Well, as far as where do I see the show, a year from now, I really hope we're still doing it. Right. I
Right?
mean, there are things that could happen that would
Yeah.
push us to not being able to do it. What it looks like, I don't know. Are we still releasing this big long episode once a week? Or are we doing, some smaller stuff
Hmm.
or do we go every other week? I don't know that kind of stuff. But the biggest thing is I do want the show to still be here because it's kind of a core part of who we are,
Right.
right? And figuring this stuff out. Um, so there's that. Now, from from kind of a logistics standpoint, I really want to get both of us into the same recording and editing software.
Yes.
It actually would be nice if we had a little more similar microphones too. The Blue Yeti that you have has a very distinct personality, right? And what it picks up and that kind of stuff too. So we'll be talking about some of that kind of stuff. When I told you I had a plan, this is some of the stuff that I think we need to talk about. But
Yeah.
I also plan on moving to an iPad next year, which is going to change my setup pretty dramatically, right? I mean, I'll end
Yes.
up needing to use my iPhone to run the Zoom versus right now it's just the camera for the Zoom, which I'm running on my Mac, blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to
Hmm.
go along with this, but I think we're going to do some work on Ferrite, test that out because
Hmm.
that's editing and recording all in one. And there's plenty of other stuff we could do on the Mac. But again, if we want to be on the iPads, then that's where we need to be. And one of the reasons I want to be all in on iPad, so my consulting business, I don't do anything that really is Mac intensive, right? I don't have
Okay.
special software that can't run on an iPad. I use Word and Excel and PowerPoint and numbers and basic stuff that I can do. It's all on my iPad mini, right? It's just
Right.
not conducive to doing that kind of work. I want to do more on location recording next year. I just did not camp enough this year. It had nothing to do with business, right? I mean, this is my
Right.
personal life was
Yeah.
way up and down this year. So I want to do more on location recording, which will change kind of how I want to handle the microphones and the cameras and some of that kind of stuff. So um, I'd like to see more bonus episodes that maybe have nothing to do with tech. We've done Cruise Ship Corner and
Yeah.
we've done a camping episode or to get into, I mean, this is gadgets for families, not Apple for families, even though we do a lot of Apple stuff. And maybe we
Yes.
restructure and say once a month we're going to do a gaming episode and, some of that kind of stuff that we can explore. So I want to explore that kind of stuff as well. Um, as much as it pains me to say, I kind of want to get away from my AirPods Pro Max as my headphones. They're heavy,
Yeah.
and anytime you have sinus stuff, it feels like your head's being squished together.
Right. Right.
Um, but I got to have something to monitor the audio or to be able to hear you with. And I actually had a pair of earbuds, old pair of earbuds, and I plugged them in, and there was a hiss, and I was like, "Oh, yep, nope."
Yeah.
And
You're not going
so
to deal with that.
no. So, but yeah, that's one thing I want to do. And then I think the other thing I want to really figure out how to dial in the video, right? What makes the most sense? What's
Yeah.
efficient? Not just record a bunch of stuff and plug it out there, because if there's a better use of my time, I definitely want to take advantage of that. But want to dial that in. I'd like to get a better setup for the videos. I love my Apple Watch, but my wrist aches the way I have to kind of hold my watch to get the camera to show me using my Apple Watch. So I want to figure some of
Yes.
that kind of stuff out. And I've got a couple of ideas. One's for a social media kind of tripod that's got lighting and all that kind of stuff. So I sent that over to you. It's
Oh
something
yeah.
I'm going to think
Yeah. I
about. But
saw it.
I'd really like to dial in that video stuff and know what's too much, what's not enough, how often should we be publishing content, some of those kinds of things.
Hmm.
And I really will enjoy it when it's both of us, right? I mean, sometimes I've looked at some of the stuff we've done and I've like, I don't know that I want to push that out because it is too much me, but I've had the bandwidth to do it right now.
Right.
You're in your busy season, and I'm actually moving into my slower consulting season because holidays
Hmm.
come up and people don't have as much time to do things and vacations and stuff like that.
Right.
So, which is the opposite for you because you get all the events and stuff that are going on that you got to provide
Yeah.
popcorn and
Everyone
snacks and
that's
all that
off
kind of.
work on off of vacation and all of that, they're out shopping at different events and
Yep.
nutcracker markets and holiday markets. So
Yeah. 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 So that's what I think. That's where I think I'd like to focus um, and then here's the big one. I think we would both say this. We would love to be doing something with the Vision Pro next year,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Whether that be an occasional episode or, whatever the case may be. That one's a little bit iffier for me at this point, especially where I know no matter what, I'm going to have to upgrade my computer hardware. I mean,
Right.
more and more Apple's putting more things on their silicon. I'm still on an Intel Mac. It runs fine. It can do all the basic things that I want it to do, but
Hmm.
at some point they're going to cut off all the fancy stuff is only going to be on Apple Silicon. And if this is
Right.
the business that they're in, we might as well be in it. So I don't know. We'll see where that leads to. If that's a, a Mac Mini sitting in here that I turn into a server, right, that I can get to,
Right.
or whatever the case may be. So we'll see. That's what I have. I definitely want to do some upgrading. I'll be thinking about that. Jason and I will probably be talking a lot about that over the holidays. Um, there are going to be
Yeah.
some weeks during the holidays we're not going to record, so maybe we'll talk about some of that kind of stuff then. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Some of the things we can do, shorter, quick, short things and
yeah,
things like that. So, all right, folks. Well, yeah. I think that's a show. To wrap these up, you know, that's we said time and time again, we're not only making this show for you guys and friends and family, but we're making it for ourselves too. So, but I do want to take this time to thank everyone that's contributed to the show, whether that's been through feedback, um, giving us advice, giving us critiques, letting us know what you think about the show, and to everyone that shared it with someone. You know what I mean? We really appreciate that. We're still growing. We know this is going to be a journey numbers wise too, not just content wise, but numbers wise and growing the show. That's going to be a journey as well. But before we go, I just wanted to say a few things to Greg. So it's funny too. I get this a lot from my family. Like a lot of people, like when they know me personally, they're like, "How are you friends with this guy in Utah?" Like, we're like the odd couple. And I'll save that for a different episode of how and why me and Greg bonded like we did. But um, I just want to say thank you for all of this. You know what I mean, and not just the show. We've been talking about doing this show for a while, but all the way back from to to when we wrote the blog together. When you started Gadgets for Families, and it was just a newsletter and things like that. I was so excited when you started allowing me to write for that. And I had so much fun. Um, Also, too, that was our one of our busiest points too in our career because Stewart kept us, pretty busy, back
yeah.
back then. And we still managed to make time, even if it was about whatever new BlackBerry was coming out or whatever game system was coming out or something like that. It was so fun to have that outlet, and you allowed me to do that. So not only uh, to work in tech as a hobby, you also gave me my career, right? I worked in IT for years and, help desk, service desk, things like that. And you actually gave me an opportunity for it not to just be a 9 to 5 job, right? You kind of made things fun for me. You told a story about us going to the Apple store. And I remember thinking, like, I mean, I'm on the clock and I'm in the Apple store trying on watch bands and stuff with my boss. It was like the best thing ever. And, you know, we kind of kept that same dynamic the whole time I was there. Now, Greg mentioned several times during the episode that me and him have a lot of differences. Now, one of the things I was kind of the office jokester, prankster, right? I remember wrapping one of the coworkers was leaving. We wrapped everything in newspaper. you know, I think for you, we kind of put some one of those like tape barriers around your desk, and we filled everything with balloons in your office. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I'm not the
and I,
prankster like that.
yeah. So we were kind of like the odd couple, and you just kind of you took my career from it just being a job to, and again, I went and got finished my education, got my degree, and got certifications and stuff like that. So my career was ready to move forward from just the basic service desk stuff. But I mean, you were a big part of that, you know. And I tell you all the time, you don't realize how much you infected and impacted my family at the time. My wife was pregnant with my middle son now, and that was around the time when like I said, my career took off. So it went from just being a 9 to 5 job to actually having fun in technology. And every step of that way, you were a part of that for me. And I just want to say thank you for that, man. You know,
Well,
so
you're welcome. Well deserved. Um, I don't do well with compliments. You know that about me.
I know you never
But
needed a thank you. You never needed a pat on the back. So
here's the thing. we all need to be who we are. I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about the show, but I've just finished book 2. Matter of fact, I stayed up way too late last night of a 3-book series, and it's the kind of book that I like. I won't go into that, but kind of the whole message was this main character and those around him figuring out who they are. And
Hmm.
finally, at the end of book 2, and there's one more coming, like I said, they decided we're just going to be who we are.
Right.
Right. And in order for us to get more out of life, and if you want any more on this, go pick any one of my Leaders Lift podcasts. Jason will tell you that. But in order for us to get the most out of life, we have to know who we are. And then we have to embrace that to a certain extent. Now, I'm not saying that there are certain behaviors and things like that that you have to work on and fix, right? But we have to embrace who we
Right.
are. And if you are friends with or care about or influence or lead anyone around you, you have to help them do that same thing, right? And so I
Right.
have 2 non-family members pinned. Remember, you can have 9 messages pinned, right? In messages, there's 9.
Right.
2 of 9 are not family members, and Jason's one of them. So right back at you. I mean, I appreciate this. I've lived here in Utah, come back to Utah in 2017, and we've talked every week, I think, since I moved
Right.
back, even before we started this podcast. And so um, I appreciate it. And it doesn't matter that we have all these big differences. We have enough in common, and love what we do. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Greg, I just wanted to say thank you for all of that, and just to let you know that I appreciate you. So, but that's all we have, folks, for this week. You guys, Greg, you want to talk about next week, or do you have anything planned?
I don't have plans yet. I got to look at that.
Okay.
17.1 is likely to drop, so we might need to
Yep.
talk about what's new in 17.1. Hopefully, we'll get some response from Apple on this whole, you know, rebooting overnight kind of stuff. But check that out. We'll see. Maybe it'll be a surprise.
Yeah. All right, guys, and as usual, we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right, folks, and like I said earlier, what is a tech show without talking about technology? I know we spent a lot of time talking about our journey and how things have been and what we've learned up until episode 20, but let's jump back into some tech. And Greg, you again, we can never talk enough about customizations, right? There's always something new to learn. We're always constantly figuring out new things and learning new things on our own. And again, we love to share those with everyone. So let's talk about some of the customizations that you made to your home screen and focus modes and things like that.
Yeah, so I got rid of one of my focus modes. I had this morning focus mode where until like 9 o'clock in the morning, both my iPad and my phone changed the home screens just so it was the stuff that I did for my morning study, like my scripture
Hmm.
study and some of that kind of stuff. But I found that that doesn't really work for me anymore. So I got rid of that focus mode and I've remapped focus modes to some of my screens. I did figure out on my fitness focus mode that I could initiate that one if I was using the workout app or that work outdoors app that I
Hmm.
use. So I've got that triggering, and that just cleans up a bunch of stuff. It puts on the Wayfinder watch face, which I like when I'm riding my bike, and because I can, see the elevation and some of those kinds of things,
Right.
and then it simplifies everything else. But I decided that when I got my Pro Max, I was going to try and go all in on widgets on my
Yes.
home screen on my phone. So I'll just talk about that. I mean, I did revamp my iPad home screen a little, not as much, but for my home screen, I wanted to get rid of all the icons. So, and I
Okay.
was able to do it because most of the time um, when you've got a widget, you tap on it and you can get into the app, right? So that
Yeah.
was kind of my premise. So I did change my dock. So originally I had something else in the place of Safari in the dock. I can't remember what it was, but then I realized I was using Safari so much that I didn't
Hmm.
want to keep using Spotlight Search or go to a second page. So in my dock on the right is Safari, then Messages, then pCalc, and then
Yeah.
Outlook. Now Outlook's what I use for email. Period. End of story. All my Gmail, all my work email, everything goes through Outlook. So my work calendar is in there, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what my dock looks like now. And then
Okay.
above that, I've used Widget Smith to put my absolute favorite picture of my wife.
Yeah.
And it's in one of the medium-sized ones, so that is there. And then if I swipe up on that widget, it goes to Find My for her. So, if I
Okay.
want to see if she's left school or whatever the case may be, then I can go
Right.
in and see that. I don't, my kids are in college, so I'm not going to try and track the college kids. That's
Yeah.
probably a
Yeah. You
bad
have no
idea.
need to.
They've left it on, so I can still go see. And every
Yeah.
once in a while, like when I need to talk to Dustin or something, I can see if he's um, in the music building at U of
Right.
H or not,
You'll
right?
know whether to message them or not. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That makes sense.
So, but anyway, so I can tap on that and get into it, which is great. Next, that because the medium icons you can put two side by side, right?
Yes.
And I'll do a short on this, just kind of show this, or I'll throw a screenshot up or something like that if I can make sure that there's nothing I don't want the world to see on here. Then
Hmm.
I use notes a ton, not just for our show, but for all of my personal journaling, my personal study is notes. And so I actually have another medium sized widget that is two different notes widgets. One of them is it'll open the last created quick note
Okay.
and it shows the text in there. And so first thing in the morning, and I actually need to build a shortcut to do this. Every day I want a brand new quick note. And so I need to build a shortcut that just at 12:01 a.m. it automatically creates a new one, and it's just sitting there nice and neat for me to use. I need to
Okay.
figure out if I can do that. But anyway, so I can see that one there, and I can just tap on it, and it pulls up the note. Now I'm getting some weird behaviors, and I wrote about this in the iOS 17, or I talked about it in the video I did on iOS 17. When I go into notes from these widgets, it doesn't
Hmm.
go where I expect it to. And if it does go, like if it goes into the folder and I tap on a note in a folder, it doesn't open it. But if I hit back, then it's on that note. So there's some weird behavior
Okay.
going on there. But that's what I have
So,
there.
any other widgets not updating? Because I've been seeing that too. Like the
Mm-mm.
widgets just don't update like they
Nope.
should.
I haven't had
Okay.
that
So maybe I'll
problem.
just do a soft reset.
Yeah. And then my other one, if I swipe on that widget, the other one is all my iCloud notes. So the reason I put that one up there is then it puts up any note that's the most recent one I did something with. I can
Right.
put it there. And I've got some pinned notes that I use regularly, or like right now, the one that's showing on there is the show outline for today's
Yeah.
show because we've been updating that. So above
Okay.
that, I have a large a large set of widgets, and one of them is Fantastical. And I'm using Fantastical's calendar and up next. So it's like got a couple of appointments that my daughter has later today because I don't have anything else, at least on this calendar after we record. I have a meeting when we're done today, but it's on my Outlook stuff. So that's kind of my
Okay.
personal calendar, but it also is a way for me to see the date. And, I'm always trying to figure out what day is something is happening on, that kind of stuff. So I've got
Yeah.
there. If I swipe on that stack, then I also have the all iCloud, which now I need to remove since I put it down there um, in that uh, in that smaller one. So actually, I'm going to take that off right
Okay.
now. And by the way,
Wait,
I
but that one's
have
showing like birthdays and anniversaries and things like that. So you
Fantastic
want to
Cal
remove
can.
that one?
No, I'm
Oh, okay.
removing
I
the
didn't realize.
notes one. I've got two. Basically, I've got two widgets now that go to the all notes folder in notes. I
Hmm.
don't need that one. That's one I'm removing.
Okay.
So, but no, the
So
Fantastic Cal one I'm leaving on there for sure.
okay, and that one, and it does like the holidays. It
Yeah,
shows you Arbor Day
exactly.
and stuff like that.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
And then the other one behind that, so this is kind of my functional one. The other thing behind that is Microsoft's To Do app, because that's what I use for all my to dos. So I can just swipe and I can see that.
So
And
you don't use the Apple. Uh,
reminders?
I thought you used reminders. Yeah.
No, I don't. Not for work related stuff. So I do use it for
Okay.
my personal reminders and things like that. But I like Microsoft To Do. It integrates into the Outlook app. It's good on the Mac.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, I use it because I can categorize things just a little bit better from a work standpoint. So,
Okay.
and that's free even if you don't have an Office 365 subscription.
Okay.
So yeah, I use that. They've made it interactive. Them and Fantastical, both of those widgets are totally interactive. So,
Okay.
and then the top large widget. So I've got three levels of widgets, right? Two mediums on the
Hmm.
bottom, a large one on the middle, and the large one on the top. And the top one, I've got Widget Smith, that cover flow one that I told you about, right? Where you can swipe through
Yes.
the album covers. And so I've got that one with the things that I do the most. I've got, my station that if I want Apple to just play a bunch of music that it picks for me, it'll do that.
Right.
And then I've got, you'll laugh about this, but Riders in the Sky. Remember the old band with Tumble and Tumbleweeds and that kind of stuff? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's one of them. And then I've got, some of the other key playlists that I listen to just a ton are in that. But it's really nice because I was able to pick, like, for my Christmas playlist, I've got a picture of the Christmas village that I do with the Christmas tree. Um, so anyway, that's what I've got there. The great thing about that is I tap through once I get to the playlist, I just tap on
Mhm.
it again and it starts playing. And underneath that is the Music Now Playing app. So that'll automatically update that too. So
Okay.
once I hit play on that, I can see that it's been updated. And then the third one in that smart stack is Overcast. And I can resume the podcast I was just listening to, or it's showing me the 2 new podcasts that have dropped in my feed. And so that's kind of my entertainment widget that's up there on the top. So I've got my
Okay.
entertainment, my work, my wife, and my notes. That's all my home screen. There's not a single icon other than in the dock.
Okay. So how are you navigating icons? Not, I know there's other pages of apps and things like that, but when you need quick access, are you just using Spotlight?
Yep, yep. And this
Okay.
is why I had to set this up. So if you put the large widget down on the bottom, because where my thumb rests is like right in the middle of the bottom set of widgets, right?
Yes.
If I put the large one down there and try and do Spotlight, it activates the widget too often. It's like I'm
Yeah.
tapping on the widget. So by putting the 2 medium ones there with space in the middle, it's not a big deal. I just drop down Spotlight. And especially with shortcuts for the different things you're searching for showing
Hmm.
up when you search through Spotlight, that's what I'm using. My second page has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 apps, 3 folders mixed in with some other stuff, 7 apps and 3 folders mixed in, but I hardly ever go to this. One of the things I do go to this page for, that's where the phone icon is now, is on page 2, and I only have 2 pages. But one of the reasons I come here is I have a large widget from Sports Alerts that's got all of the top 25 college
Yeah.
football teams on it right now. So
Right.
I can see those.
Like the ranking, it shows
No,
it'll
it's got their
just the
games.
rankings.
So like right now it's
Oh,
showing
okay.
all the Saturday games, what time they are and what their records are and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then behind that is the actually that one's a pretty deep stack. I've got the weather widget, so I could get it there, but I usually do weather on my watch. I've got the Find My or the Contacts widget,
Yep.
a large one with 4 contacts from my family in it, and then I've got a news widget just to show Apple top news stuff. So
Okay.
the other widget I have on there, and this one's kind of the way I'm trying to make it work is I do go into photos quite a bit, and so I put a medium widget up there that's photos, so I could just
Hmm.
tap and go into that photos. I'm probably going to get rid of that widget and just put the photos icon on because it changes what photos it's showing me. Sometimes it'll do today or whatever, and so then when I go into the
Right.
photos app, I still have to switch and go to the library. So
So that's what I was gonna. That's what I was gonna ask. Can you keep a static photo on there?
well,
Select the photo
I
that you
think
want.
I could if I did Widgetsmith, but I just wanted to go straight into the photos app. This was, instead of
Right.
having the photos icon, just use the widget to go into the
Yeah.
photos app. So I'll be tweaking that one. So I don't go to this page a lot. So
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
just,
You just from
yeah,
that one single page, your front page.
yeah. So, and have done a few things, like I've created shortcuts for apps, and like if I had the icon for my scripture study app on here, it would
Hmm.
not be the default from the church's that installs. It would be a custom picture of Christ that
Yeah.
I have that would do it. Um, so I changed it to that, and
Yeah.
some of those kinds of things. So that's a lot of customization that you can do. But I wanted to share that. I'll try and do um, a short or something like that on it. But I've got a combination of all these things: widgets, custom icons, shortcuts, focus modes, action button.
Yeah.
Really love the action button. What I'm doing with the action button. So it's part of what's. I said this in my blog posts. I'm falling back in love with using the iPhone,
Right.
and it's a
Right. And you.
combination of all these things that I can now use it kind of the way that I want to use it. And there's only one thing that's driving me absolutely bonkers. And I heard somebody else finally say this yesterday on a podcast. I was listening to ATP. Casey Liss said the same thing. He was trying to use the 80% max charge. And
Hmm.
he just went up to the max phone. He had never been on a max phone. He's finally on the max phone. But he's having the same problem that I am, is that it just makes me think about the battery life way too much. Now, over the
Right.
weekend, I was in and out of the house doing a whole bunch of stuff, never put it on a charger during the day. And charging it to max, I'd go to 80%, and then it would end the day around 20, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
there's
Same here. Same
something
here.
stressful about that battery icon feeling mostly empty. And I don't put the percentage up, but it feels mostly empty. And I haven't had a day where I was like always on cellular yet. And
Yep.
so I'm just concerned that it would put me down into low power mode by the end of the day, like if I was out and about all day. So, I
Yeah.
mean, the reality is I just need to turn this off. It's stressing me out, right? I just need to turn it
Yeah.
off and let it charge to max. And the battery life will still be fine in a year when I trade it in, or when I decide to turn it into my camera
Right.
for the podcast. So,
And
but
if
beyond
if the
that,
battery's damaged and it goes down below, what is it, 79%, you can
yeah,
just take it and get it replaced anyway. So
yeah,
it's really no big deal. You are
yeah,
stressing for no reason.
yep. So, matter of fact, I'm going to go do that right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go turn that setting off. So, but yeah, I mean, it's making this stuff do what you want it to do, right? And
Yeah.
I said this about the Snoopy watch face. If the Snoopy watch face makes you happy, use it, right?
Yes.
If you want to go change, you want to go buy a custom icon set and make everything look like Easter pastel for Easter's, and red and green for Christmas, and whatever, do it. And if you
Yeah.
want to know more about how to do that, we'll help you. It's all through shortcuts, so it is a little bit more technical, but it's nothing that most people couldn't figure out how to do once you have the icons. So,
Right.
yeah, do what makes you happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, that's a good point. A lot of people don't realize how techy they are until they have to do something on their own, right? If they're so used to just handing someone the phone or saying, "Hey, do this for me," or do that. Once they try to do it on their own and they say, "Hey, that really wasn't that hard," they realize
Yeah.
just how much they've been trained over the last few years with these new devices and things like that. So, yeah, yeah,
And that's what we're here for.
yeah, we'll get you through. So, the last thing I wanted to cover, and it's weird, it's one of those things where I thought they were already doing something like that. So, Greg sends me one of the newsletters that we read. Um, this one's from someone at Bloomberg. Um, well, I can't remember the name, but
Yeah, this
so
was Power On.
Apple's,
Mark Gurman's
it was Gurman. That's right. It was
Power On. I think it
Mark Gurman.
was. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So he wrote about Apple's they're readying creating a system to be able to update software to unopened phones, right? So Greg and I mentioned last week, before people got their 15s and their 15 Pros in, there was already an update to iOS 17, right? And it was a crucial one. You needed to update it right out of the box, right?
Before
So
you transferred your data, otherwise it would cause
yeah,
major issues. Yeah.
yeah, you would have to
Not
start
uncommon,
back
right?
over
I
after the
mean,
update,
it is not uncommon to have this happen, right? I mean, you can think
right?
about this from a logistics standpoint. They're in a factory,
Hmm.
they've got to be boxed. The
And they have
betas
to
for
make
the,
millions of them.
yeah, and the betas for
Millions.
iOS are running right up until release candidate. They do the release candidate release 2 weeks before the phone arrives on somebody's desk, right, at their house.
Right.
And so there is no time, if there's anything after that, even at that point, right? How
Hmm.
do you box millions of iPhones? How do you update millions of iPhones, box them all, prep them for shipping in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Which is
Yep.
what, in theory, they would have to do.
So if you think about it from a user perspective, or how Apple are about their customers anyway, they want to give them the best experience. Having to open the device and not have to worry about updates and stuff is a good user experience, right? Not having to worry about connecting to Wi-Fi and doing an update. Just open it in a box and start that transfer process. Transfer your service over, and then if you have to do an update later on or something like that, that's a good point to do it. But
Do you remember,
uh,
Jason, when Steve Jobs went, "There's no way we're going to make somebody charge their phone,"
right, I remember
right?
that,
Because it's
and they come charged, yeah,
yeah, they come with charge where you could start using it immediately. Now, this was back when iPhones were still, you didn't get a brand new one every year or every 2 years, right? There were still a
right,
lot of people not getting iPhones. And he's like, no, the first experience somebody has with this beautiful device that's going to change their life is not going to be to have a red flashing battery icon that says plug me in and wait for four
right.
hours. Because how many
Having
devices
to
do you
open it
get
and
that
charge
say,
it,
please charge to full before first use?
right? A lot, or it'll say like connect for like an hour or something like that, or charge for like an hour and a half or something before use. And right, that was a good move. That was a good customer service move by from Apple. So this is part of that, right? It's that initial experience, that initial impression that someone gets when opening an iPhone for the first time, right? It it it, it may not be geared towards people who upgrade every year or people who love iPhones like us, but if you hand someone an iPhone, they open it out of the box and they look at it and wow, this thing is beautiful. And then right immediately, please update me before you can use me, or
Yeah.
please charge me. That ruins the experience. So what Apple came up with is they have a system now where they're gonna preload the software on the phones, right, before they ship. I don't know at what point, I'm assuming before it leaves the factory, right? Because once it's in the carrier's hands, they're not gonna do anything with them.
Well, they'll have
I'm
to on
assuming.
those. They'll have to on those, but this talked about in store. So
Right. The ones in store too, yeah.
think about all, I mean, they're flying off the shelves right now, right? But think
Yeah.
about that iPhone 14 Pro that's
Hmm.
been out for over a year, and it's that one color that's been sitting on the shelf in that one small store for the last 6 months. And how many software updates
Right.
have there been? I
And
mean,
security patches and things like
correct.
that. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So this was specifically mentioned in store, but I would assume that they would have something at the
Right.
factory, right? Or at the storage facility or whatever that's going to do the same thing. Sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going.
Right. No, no, no. So what they came up with is they're going to plan this system, right? And basically, it's going to be like a pad-like device, and they'll be able to stack phones on top. What it's going to do, send a signal to the phone to wake the phone, do the update, and then send a signal to shut down the phone, right? To put it in standby mode to save on that battery
Well,
life,
they're going to
right? So that the
power
phone,
it on and
yes,
power it
powered on,
off, right? It isn't
right?
just that because these phones don't sit in these boxes in
In
what
standby mode, right, right. They're
in
off,
what we think of as standby mode, right? We think of it as powered off, which I don't think is 100% accurate. We'll geek out
no.
on that here in just a minute.
No, no, it's not. So yep, send a signal to power it on, do the whole boot process to boot up because it has to be booted to receive the software upgrade. Run the upgrade, and then somehow know when it's complete. Send a signal to shut the phone down again. Right. So we talked
Without
about it,
opening the
and
box,
without opening
all
the
the little
box, still the
tabbies are
plastic.
still intact, right?
So my question to you, one, I thought they were already doing something similar to that, but now when you understand the process that it's going to take, when does Apple give up that control? Because this is not something that they advertise that they have the ability for. So maybe this is the last two devices, right? That iPhone 14 and 15, right? And phones going forward. They didn't mention iPads, they didn't mention AirPods and things like that. But when you think about it, what gives a phone the ability to be remotely turned on and turned off?
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like the Black Mirror, that sci-fi show, sci-fi Twilight Zone kind of show. Like I didn't know Apple had that much control over devices. And
Yeah.
when did they give up that control?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Nobody needs to panic about this, right? I mean,
Yes, yes. It's
this is
not a
like all
scare
those
tactic.
stupid emails that I get that say, "Hey, I infected your computer and I can control your camera and I've been watching you,"
Right,
right? This is
right,
not that kind of a scenario. And if anybody's going to do this right, it's going to be Apple. So
It's going to
there's
be
no,
Apple, and
there's
not for
no,
nefarious reasons, right? They're not
yeah,
going to turn over that type of control to a
yeah,
government agency, right? How many times has Apple ran into issues with the government because they wouldn't unlock someone's devices or
yeah.
turn it over to someone? So I trust Apple, but it's just weird knowing that they have that control, right?
Here's what I think it is. So if I remember right, when you there's a setting, matter of fact, I'll go in and look at it right now, but there's a setting in Find My,
Hmm.
right, where you can specify for your device. Let me go into my Pro Max and notify as left behind. But there's also this feature I thought I don't see it in here right now, but I thought there was also maybe it's in the other settings. I think there's a feature, or at least I thought there was a feature that said, "Hey, when if you flip this on, your device will be able to be located even when it's powered off."
Right. And
Right.
so I don't remember exactly where it is, but I know mine is on because I know when I shut down my phone, either restarted or something, it says iPhone is still um, iPhone is able to be tracked or iPhone is still able to be located or something like that. It gives you that pop-up notification when the phone is turned off or when it's booting down to let you know, even though you're turning it off, it's still going to be tracked. So that is a setting. So it's
Yeah,
when
I can't.
even when the phone is off, it's not actually off.
Yeah, I can't find it right now. So, but yeah, I really thought there was something around that, and
Yes.
um, what they probably are using there is Bluetooth LE, right? Bluetooth Low
I think
Energy.
so.
So I
Because they're
think
talking
because
about a pad, right? And they're stacking them on that pad. So they have to be within a few feet. And I'm assuming you can only stack them yay high, right? It may only be able to put 10 devices. Because
yeah,
the iPhone box is what, 2 inches,
yeah,
like the height of it. So if you stack, it probably has a certain height, and then that top one won't receive the updates or something. So there's limitations to it.
yeah. So I think that's probably what they're doing, right? So if they can find the location, um, if they can find the location when it's powered off using
Mhm.
the Find My network, that means there's some sort of signal that's being there until the battery dies, right? Which
Yes,
would
when it's,
probably take forever.
yeah, totally dead.
And I had some of the similar issues. Remember when the AirPods Max came out, right? There was this big thing about all the AirPods Max dying when you thought you had
Hmm.
put them into standby mode, but you really hadn't. Um,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So I think
yeah,
it's probably the um I think that's probably the thing. I don't know. It could be that. But so my
right,
guess is there's something like that that will allow them to send that signal and
right. Or
um
maybe the NFC chip too, right? Because you have to be in a certain range for NFC to even work,
yeah.
right? And these new phones have where you can tap. So maybe if it's like I said, a short stack of maybe 10 or to 8 to 10 boxes, they're within that range, and maybe they're using an NFC chip. We don't know, right? They're not going to release this. They're not going to unlock this for developers to be able to develop things for, at least not in the future. But it's just one of those things where Apple has these abilities to do phones like diagnostics on the AirPods, right? There's not many ports and not many things they can do, but we took them to the Apple store, a couple of weeks ago, and they ran diagnostics on them,
Yeah.
right? You think about when you remove the watch band and they have that little port inside of the little notch right there on your Apple Watch. And we always thought that was going to be some kind of expansion port for different watch bands and stuff like that, but it turned out it was like a diagnostic port or something. So
Yeah.
these phones have a lot of abilities that we don't know about that Apple can take advantage of. And yeah, this is an example of that, right? Really
Yeah,
cool.
I'm not worried about it. I mean, I've had Apple support folks say, "Hey, I'm going to send you a link and click on this and it's going to, run a script on your phone and pull back some
Yeah,
diagnostics so I can see what's going on." There is a lot of that kind of stuff. So,
yeah,
you know, I I don't know. I don't worry about it, right?
yeah.
So if this
I don't think it's a
gets out
cause for
there,
concern.
that's what the media is going to say. Um, they're going to say, "Hey, this is Apple. They can shut off your device, do anything they want with it," and that's just not the case. So
Yeah. Well, in theory, they could. I don't think that's going to be the case. They're not going to be shutting people's phones down remotely or whatever. And obviously, again, this is a pad-like device. This is a separate piece of hardware that's going to control that. So it's not going to be somebody walking around with a remote in their pocket shutting down iPhones. Um, but cool is for them to pull back the curtain a little bit and say, "Hey, this is what we're doing to improve that experience." And then us as geeks say, "Hey, I didn't know you can do that.
Yeah.
Like I didn't realize that was a thing."
Yep. Yeah.
So,
So yeah,
but
I'm looking at an article on The Verge. Now this is a little bit, it's a 2021 article, but it talks about which phones can do this, and this was only through the 13 at the time. But yeah, it's basically
okay,
that send last location. As long as you've got that on, it's constantly going to be sending that until the battery really
you're right. Right.
dies,
Oh, it was
right?
the yeah, send last location,
Yeah.
right? So if someone grabs your phone and turn it off, it can still
Yeah.
send that location out.
And so it says if you're using iOS 15, I assume it's still on 16 and 17 on your iPhone, you'll be able to locate it even if it's run out of battery power or has been shut off. So, yeah, there's something going on there. And maybe as part of this, they come up with a new state, right? That's this like super low battery
Hmm.
mode, right? That all of their phones kind of sit in until you power it on the first time, and then it's this preloaded state. Who knows, right? But
Yeah,
I'm not worried about them doing anything nefarious with it. But I think it's cool
yeah,
that you
I
won't
don't
have
think
to
so.
worry about a device you get having to, oh, I've missed 6 versions of the software.
Right.
So
Okay. All right. Well, that was all I had today. I did want to talk about that. I thought it was really cool. And thanks for sharing those customizations. Really weird that you don't have the phone app on your phone, which again is going to make me reconsider too. There's some apps that I just have just out of habit from my very first iPhone to now, just always having those few icons down there, and maybe with some widgets and things like that, I can get them moved around.
yeah, I've made a few really nice, pretty contact posters, and most of them I've never seen pop up on the screen
Right.
because it's the contact photo because it's always the messaging. So
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, that's all we had this week. I think that was a good show. I think that was a long enough episode to work with. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening as usual, and we'll talk to you soon.
have a good one.